Part 1, a night unlike any other. For the past 12 years, Yusuf had called the cold streets of Tel Aviv his home. Once a university student filled with dreams. Life's twists had robbed him of everything: family, hope, even his identity. Now, he was just a forgotten shadow blending into alleyways and backstreets. One rainy night, while curled up under a ripped top near the central station, he heard an unusual sound: polished shoes walking closer, a scent of expensive cologne, and then a voice. "Are you okay?" it asked. Yusuf looked up, squinting through the drizzle. A man in a dark suit stood before him, holding an umbrella. At first, he didn't recognize him. But when the stranger stepped into the streetlight, Yusuf froze. It was Benjamin Netanyahu. To be continued. Part 2, an unexpected invitation. Yusuf blinked several times, unable to believe his eyes. "Mr. Prime Minister," he stammered. Netanyahu smiled, but there was a seriousness in his gaze. "Yes. What's your name?" "Yusuf," he replied hesitantly. "Yusuf, have you eaten tonight?" Yusuf shook his head. "I haven't had a real meal in days." Without another word, Netanyahu reached into his coat, took out a phone, and spoke briefly in Hebrew. Moments later, a black SUV pulled up beside them. "I want you to come with me," Netanyahu said. "You need a warm place and some dignity back in your life." Confused, suspicious, but too weak to resist, Yusuf followed. The heated car was a world apart from the cardboard and concrete he had known. As they drove through the city, Netanyahu spoke little, occasionally glancing at Yusuf with a thoughtful look. Finally, they reached a private airstrip just outside Tel Aviv. Yusuf's jaw dropped. A gleaming white jet stood ready on the tarmac, engines quietly humming. "Where are we going?" Yusuf asked, his voice shaking. Netanyahu turned to him and said with a grin, "To Dubai. You deserve to know what it feels like to live, at least for one night." Part 3, Flight to the Unknown. As Yusuf stepped onto the jet, he paused. The carpet was plush beneath his worn shoes, the lights dimmed in a warm golden hue. Flight attendants greeted him with kind smiles, smiles that didn't seem forced or fake. It felt safe. He took a seat beside the window, not quite knowing how to sit properly in something so soft. Netanyahu sat across from him, unbuttoning his blazer and relaxing into the seat as if they were lifelong friends. The jet lifted into the night sky, slicing through clouds like a silent arrow. For a long time, neither man spoke. Then Netanyahu leaned forward and said, "Tell me about your life." Yusuf hesitated. Nobody had asked him that in years. But something about the moment loosened his tongue. He spoke of his childhood in Haifa, his dreams of becoming an artist, the accident that took his father, the debt that buried his family, and the depression that slowly consumed him after losing his mother. He spoke of rejection, of being unseen, of begging and being blamed for existing. Netanyahu listened silently, eyes locked on Yusuf's. When he finished, Yusuf looked away, ashamed. But Netanyahu didn't show pity, only resolve. "You know," Netanyahu said, "most people think a homeless man is invisible because he's weak. But I think you're invisible because you're stronger than most people can handle." Yusuf didn't know what to say. They flew in silence the rest of the way. But Yusuf's heart had already begun to thaw. Part 4, the golden arrival. When the wheels of the private jet kissed the tarmac of Dubai International Airport, Yusuf peered out the window in awe. It was past midnight, but the city sparkled like a jewel beneath the stars. Every skyscraper was lit up, every road a glowing ribbon of motion. A black Rolls-Royce Phantom awaited them at the foot of the stairs. As they descended, Yusuf clutched the railing, afraid he might wake up at any moment. "Tonight," Netanyahu said with a smile, "you're not just a guest. You're royalty." The chauffeur opened the door for them, and Yusuf stepped inside the vehicle. His breath catching at the interior, stars twinkled in the ceiling like the night sky. Soft Arabic music played in the background as the car moved effortlessly through the neon-lit streets of Dubai. Their destination, Burj Al Arab. the sail-shaped hotel known as one of the most luxurious in the world. Upon arrival, they were greeted by staff in crisp uniforms. No ID checks. No credit cards. Just Netanyahu's presence opened doors. Inside, Yusuf's jaw dropped. Gold-plated elevators, aquariums embedded in the walls, and a suite that looked like a palace from his childhood dreams awaited him. As they entered the duplex suite, a butler offered them fresh dates and exotic fruit juices. Yusuf turned to Netanyahu and whispered, "Why me?" "Because someone like you," Netanyahu replied, "deserves to be reminded what dignity feels like." Yusuf stood at the suite's floor-to-ceiling window, looking down at the city he never thought he'd see, in a hotel he never dreamed he'd enter, wondering if he was still the same man who used to sleep on a park bench under the cold Jerusalem sky. Part 5, A Night Like No Other. Yusuf stepped into the marble-clad bathroom, unsure whether to cry or laugh. Gold-plated faucets, scented towels, a whirlpool tub the size of a small pool, it felt more like a dream than a hotel. After a hot shower, he changed into the silk robe the butler had laid out for him. For the first time in years, he felt clean, not just in body, but in spirit. Meanwhile, Netanyahu was already dressed in a sleek black tuxedo. "Ready for dinner?" he asked. They were chauffeured to Atmosphere, the restaurant on the 122nd floor of Burj Khalifa, the tallest building in the world. As the elevator soared, Yusuf could feel his heart racing, not out of fear, but anticipation. At the top, they were led to a private table by the window. Below them, Dubai sprawled like a sea of lights. The Maître D didn't present a menu. Instead, Netanyahu said, "Chef's tasting menu. All 12 courses. And make sure his glass is never empty." What followed was a culinary odyssey: caviar on saffron toast, truffle risotto, wagyu beef, edible gold desserts. Each dish looked like art, each bite a revelation. Between courses, Netanyahu told stories of politics, travel, war, and peace. But he always circled back to one theme: the value of the forgotten. "You know what I've learned," he said, sipping aged wine. "It's not leaders or celebrities who teach you about humanity. It's those who've lived through suffering without losing their soul." Yusuf couldn't speak. His throat was tight, his eyes moist. Not just from the wine, but from the validation. When dessert arrived, a floating sphere of chocolate that cracked open to reveal fire-roasted pistachio mousse, Yusuf smiled. "I never thought I'd be up here," he said. "Not in a million years." Netanyahu leaned in. "This is just the beginning." Part 6, The Midnight Miracle. As they descended from the clouds of the Burj Khalifa, Yusuf could hardly believe the night wasn't over. But Netanyahu wasn't finished. "I want you to see the desert at night," he said. "It'll change you." They boarded a black Range Rover waiting outside, and the driver sped them toward the endless dunes outside the city. The lights of Dubai faded behind them, swallowed by the silence of the sand. Eventually, they reached a private desert camp, lit by lanterns and stars. A bonfire crackled in the center. Oud music drifted through the night air. Waiters appeared like mirages, offering Arabic coffee, dates, and spiced lamb roasted underground. Yusuf stood in awe as a falconer presented him with a hooded falcon. "He senses strength," the man said. "And sadness." "I have plenty of both," Yusuf whispered. They sat beside the fire, just the two of them now, far from the world. Netanyahu reached into a leather case and handed Yusuf a silver envelope. "What's this?" "Something I've arranged," Netanyahu replied. Inside was a letter of approval, a full scholarship, a housing grant, a passport application, and most shockingly, a bank card. "I pulled some strings. You now have legal residency in Israel and the UAE. You'll go to school in Tel Aviv. Learn, grow, heal." Yusuf stared at the fire. The words didn't make sense at first. Then they crashed into him all at once. "You're giving me the life." "No," Netanyahu said gently. "I'm just returning what was stolen from you. A future." As the flames danced in Yusuf's eyes, he realized this wasn't just charity. It was justice. For every cold night he'd endured. For every look of disgust he'd received. For every moment he thought he was invisible. He was no longer the man beneath the bench. He was a man standing at the edge of a new beginning. Part 7, A New Dawn. The sun was rising over the desert, painting the dunes gold. Yusuf stood at the edge of the camp, feeling the soft sand beneath his bare feet. He hadn't slept. Not because he couldn't, but because he didn't want to miss a single second of this rebirth. Netanyahu approached with 2 steaming cups of tea. This sunrise, he said, marks the beginning of something far greater than one night in Dubai. Yusuf nodded. It marks the end of my old life. They sat in silence as the light touched their faces. It wasn't the heat of Dubai's sun that warmed Yusuf, it was the burning realization that he was no longer forgotten. A convoy arrived. Netanyahu stood, brushing the sand off his trousers. It's time. Yusuf turned. A black car waited for him. A driver opened the door. Netanyahu handed Yusuf a slim black folder. Inside is your new identity. Your documents. Everything you need. And one more thing. He reached into his coat and pulled out a small object, Yusuf's old broken photograph. The one he'd always kept in his pocket. The edges were worn, but it had been placed in a brand new silver frame. I had it restored, Netanyahu said. You told me this picture was the only thing you had. Now, it will remind you of where you came from, but never limit where you can go. Yusuf clutched the frame, his throat tight. Why me? He asked softly. Netanyahu looked at him. Because the world needs to be reminded what humanity looks like. Because sometimes, hope needs to wear the face of a man who once slept on a bench. As the car pulled away, Yusuf looked back through the tinted window. Netanyahu stood tall against the rising sun, hand raised in farewell. But in that moment, he wasn't the Prime Minister. Nor a man of power. He was just someone who chose kindness. When it was least expected. The jet waited at the airstrip. Bound for Tel Aviv. Yusuf stepped onto it not as a passenger, but as someone stepping into his destiny. And as the plane rose into the sky, Yusuf whispered to himself, I was never invisible. I just hadn't been seen yet.